The cold waves of the North Atlantic slapped against the side of the research vessel as Anton Ryder zipped up his weatherproof jacket. The wind carried the smell of salt and fish, reminding him why he'd fallen in love with the sea decades ago. At 56, with gray streaking through his beard and wrinkles formed from years of squinting against the sun, Anton had spent most of his life exploring what lay beneath the waves. Today's expedition was supposed to be routine, another survey of the Norwegian seabed for a renewable energy company looking to install underwater turbines. "Weather's holding up," said Eliza, his research assistant, as she checked their equipment one last time. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency over the sonar devices they would use to map the ocean floor. "But we should hurry. Storm's coming in tomorrow." Anton nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon where dark clouds were gathering in the distance. The local fishermen had warned them about this stretch of water, not because of the weather, but because of the stories. Boats that lost power for no reason, compass needles that spun wildly, fish that disappeared overnight. Old sailor tales, Anton had thought. He'd heard plenty in his time. "Ready to drop the equipment?" he asked, helping Eliza lift their advanced sonar system to the edge of the boat. 4 hours later, Anton stared at the computer screen, his coffee gone cold beside him. What had started as a routine survey had turned into something else entirely. The sonar had picked up an unmistakable shape on the seabed, long, cylindrical, with a distinctive conning tower rising from its center. "That's a submarine," Eliza said, leaning over his shoulder. "Not just any submarine," Anton replied, his voice hushed with disbelief. "The dimensions, the profile, that's a Type 7C U-boat. German, World War II. Finding wrecks from the war wasn't uncommon in these waters. The North Atlantic had been a battleground, with hundreds of vessels sent to watery graves during those terrible years. But something about this one was different. The vessel appeared almost perfectly intact, sitting upright on the ocean floor as if it had been carefully placed there rather than sunk in combat. "Could be U-977, said Liam, their historian and youngest crew member, who had joined them in the small control room. His eyes were wide behind his glasses. "It disappeared near the end of the war. April 1944. Never found." Anton zoomed in on the image, feeling a familiar tingle of excitement mixed with reverence. Each wreck was a grave, a moment of history frozen in time. But they were also windows into the past, stories waiting to be told. And this one looked special. "We need to take a closer look," Anton decided, already mentally preparing for a dive. Back on shore that evening, Anton sat in the small harbor pub, nursing a beer as he made phone calls. The discovery needed to be reported, permission secured. A U-boat in such pristine condition would attract attention from governments, museums, and historians alike. "You found it in the dead zone, didn't you?" The question came from an old fisherman who had been listening to Anton's conversation. The man's face was weathered like old leather, his eyes the pale blue of shallow waters. "Dead zone?" Anton asked. "That's what we call it. That patch about 20 miles out. Strange things happen there. Equipment fails. Fish avoid it. Some say the water's cursed." Anton had heard similar stories in ports around the world. Sailors were superstitious by nature. Still, he found himself asking, "Any idea why?" The old man shrugged. "Some say it's from the war, something the Germans were carrying, something that shouldn't have been disturbed." 3 days later, with permits rushed through thanks to Anton's reputation and connections, their boat returned to the site. The weather had cleared, leaving the sea unusually calm, almost glassy. Perfect conditions for a dive. "Remember, this is just a survey," Anton told his team as they prepared their gear. "We document the exterior only. No penetration of the wreck until we have proper authorization." Beside him, Eliza and Liam nodded, though he could see the excitement in their eyes. They weren't the only ones. Anton had brought along 2 more divers. Vincent, a photography expert who specialized in underwater wrecks, and Nora, a marine biologist who would assess the ecosystem that had formed around the submarine over the decades. As they descended through the water column, Anton felt the familiar transformation. The noise of the world above faded, replaced by the sound of his own breathing and the occasional crackle of their communication system. The water darkened, turning from clear blue to deep navy, until finally their lights cut through the gloom. And there it was. The U-boat lay on the seabed like a sleeping giant. Unlike most wrecks Anton had explored, this one showed remarkably little damage. No obvious holes from depth charges or torpedoes. The conning tower stood proud, and though marine growth covered parts of the hull, the submarine looked almost preserved. "It's incredible," Nora's voice came through the comm system. "But something's odd. There's hardly any marine growth for a wreck that's been down here 80 years. She was right, Anton realized. Where there should have been thick layers of coral, anemones, and accumulated sediment, the U-boat was relatively clean, as if time had somehow moved differently around it. They circled the submarine, Vincent's camera flashing as he documented every angle. The U-boat's identification numbers were still visible on the conning tower beneath a thin layer of sediment. U-977. "The mystery boat," Liam said, excitement clear in his voice despite the distortion of the comms. "Last radio contact was April 12, 1944. They were on a special mission, though the records don't say what." Anton swam toward the bow, his light revealing the submarine's torpedo tubes, all closed. He moved along the hull, noting the absence of battle damage. This vessel hadn't been sunk by enemy action. So what had happened to it? And why was it in such good condition? As they completed their circuit, Anton's light passed over the main hatch. Unlike the rest of the submarine, this area seemed disturbed. The hatch itself was sealed, but the metal around it showed signs of stress. Not from battle or the pressure of the deep, but as if something had tried to get out. A shiver ran through Anton that had nothing to do with the cold water. "We've got enough for today," he said. Though they had barely used half their air supply, something about the submarine made him uneasy. The lack of damage, the minimal marine growth, the disturbed hatch. It was as if the U-boat didn't belong here, not just on this patch of seabed, but in time itself. Back on their vessel, peeling off their dive suits, the team's initial excitement gave way to puzzled discussions. "It makes no sense," Nora said, toweling her short hair. "That submarine looks like it sank a few years ago, not during World War II. And where's the damage?" Eliza added. "U-boats didn't just settle gently on the seabed." Anton stared at the preliminary images Vincent had captured. Something nagged at him, a detail just out of reach. "The hatch bothers me," he finally said. "The way the metal is warped around it. Like something was trying to get out?" Liam suggested, voicing what they'd all been thinking. That night, Anton barely slept. His dreams were filled with dark waters and metal corridors, and something waiting behind a sealed door. When he checked his phone in the morning, he had 17 missed calls. Word of their discovery had leaked. Government officials, museum curators, documentary filmmakers, and private collectors were all clamoring for details. One message stood out. It was from an old colleague at a maritime historical society. "Be careful, Anton. There's more to U-977 than the history books tell us. Some things are best left undisturbed." But Anton knew they were past that point. The U-boat had been found, and with it, whatever secrets it had kept hidden for 8 decades beneath the cold North Atlantic waves. As he looked out his hotel window at the harbor where their research vessel waited, Anton made his decision. They would go back down. They would open that hatch. They would find out what had really happened to U-977 and its crew. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that this decision would unearth secrets that would shake the world's understanding of history, science, and the darkest experiments of the war. Secrets that had been waiting patiently in the deep, preserved in the cold and dark, for someone to finally come looking. Anton's announcement that they would attempt to enter the submarine was met with mixed reactions from his team. Eliza immediately began preparing the specialized equipment they would need, while Nora expressed concern about disturbing what was essentially a war grave. Liam couldn't hide his excitement at the historical significance, and Vincent remained quiet, methodically checking his underwater camera gear. "The Norwegian Maritime Authority has granted us limited permission to investigate," Anton explained as they gathered on the deck of their research vessel. The morning sun glinted off the calm sea, almost too perfect for the North Atlantic. "We're making history today, but we do it with respect." 24 hours had passed since their initial dive, and in that time, Anton had hardly slept. The warning from his old colleague kept replaying in his mind. What did he know about U-977 that wasn't in the history books? Anton had spent the night researching, finding only sparse information. The submarine had disappeared in April 1944, reportedly on a special mission. There were rumors it carried important cargo or high-ranking officials, but nothing concrete. As they prepared their dive gear, Anton noticed a large vessel on the horizon. "Looks like we've got company," he said, pointing it out to Eliza. She squinted against the sun. "Government observers, probably. Word travels fast." "All the more reason to get down there first," Anton replied, zipping up his dry suit. The descent to the U-boat felt different this time. The excitement of discovery was now mixed with a sense of trepidation. The water seemed darker, colder somehow, though the instruments showed no change in temperature. The submarine emerged from the gloom, exactly as they had left it. Anton led the team directly to the main hatch, where they set up portable underwater lights to illuminate their work area. "Remember," Anton's voice crackled through the comm system, "we document everything. We move slowly and carefully. This is archaeology, not treasure hunting." The hatch was sealed shut, decades of sediment and marine growth cementing it in place despite the unusual preservation of the rest of the hull. It took nearly an hour of careful work with specialized tools before they felt any movement. Vincent captured everything on camera as Liam consulted the historical schematics of Type 7C U-boats they had brought along. "Almost there," Anton muttered, more to himself than the team. With one final effort, the hatch gave way with a groan that seemed to reverberate through the water around them. A small cloud of bubbles escaped from within, rising quickly to the surface. "Air pocket?" Nora asked, surprise evident in her voice. "After all these years?" "Impossible," Eliza replied, but they had all seen it. Anton shone his light into the opening. The beam cut through swirling particles to reveal a metal ladder leading down into darkness. The interior of the submarine appeared remarkably intact. No rush of sediment or signs of flooding damage. "I'll go first," Anton said, already positioning himself at the entrance. "Vincent, you follow with the camera. Eliza, you're third. Liam and Nora stay outside as our safety team. Be careful." Nora's voice was tight with concern. "Something's not right about this. Submarines don't stay dry for 80 years underwater." Anton nodded his acknowledgement before carefully maneuvering through the hatch. The space was tight, designed for young sailors in wartime conditions, not for a middle-aged diver with modern equipment. As he descended the ladder, his light revealed the control room of U-977. What he saw made him freeze halfway down. The interior was pristine. No flooding damage, no sign of the decay that should have been present after decades underwater. The control panels, the periscope station, the navigation table, all were intact, with gauges still behind their glass faces. Charts remained in place, held down by weights. A coffee mug sat on a small shelf, as if its owner had just stepped away for a moment. "Vincent, are you seeing this?" Anton asked, his voice barely above a whisper despite the comm system. "Unbelievable," came the reply as Vincent followed him into the submarine. It's like they just left yesterday." They moved deeper into the control room, lights revealing more impossible preservation. A logbook lay open on the captain's small desk, the ink still legible on the pages. Anton carefully leaned closer to read the German text. "The last entry is dated April 14, 1944, he translated, his German rusty but serviceable. 2 days after their last radio contact. What does it say?" Eliza asked, now entering the submarine behind them. Anton read slowly, translating as he went. "The cargo remains stable. The men are nervous but following orders. Captain Hines believes we have evaded Allied patrols, but I am more concerned about what we carry than any destroyer that might find us." "The cargo." Liam's voice came through the comms from outside. "Any sign of what it might be?" Anton shook his head, forgetting momentarily that Liam couldn't see him. "Not yet. But there's something else strange here. No sign of the crew. It was the most puzzling aspect of all. In abandoned submarines, you typically found remains, the sailors who went down with their vessel, who couldn't escape before flooding. But U-977 showed no evidence of human remains. No skeletons at battle stations or trapped in compartments. They abandoned ship," Vincent suggested, filming every corner of the control room. "But then why is everything still in place? And how did they seal the hatch from the outside?" Anton moved toward the rear of the control room, where a heavy watertight door led to the next compartment. It stood partially open, as if someone had passed through in a hurry. "I'm going to check the next section," he announced, squeezing through the opening. Beyond lay the officers' quarters, small bunks and personal storage areas. Like the control room, everything was eerily preserved. Anton's light fell on a small framed photograph still hanging beside one bunk. A young woman holding a baby, smiling at the camera. A family that had likely spent decades wondering what had happened to their sailor. As they explored further, the mystery only deepened. The galley still had plates set out. The radio room contained equipment in working order, dials set to frequencies long since reassigned. Everything suggested a crew that had left in an organized fashion, not one that abandoned ship in panic or perished at sea. "We need to check the cargo hold," Anton decided after they had documented the living quarters. If this was a special mission, whatever they were carrying might explain what happened. The path to the cargo area took them through narrow corridors designed to maximize space in the cramped submarine. As they moved deeper into the vessel, Anton noticed something odd about the temperature. Their instruments showed it was getting warmer, not colder. "Are you reading this?" he asked Eliza, who checked her own equipment. 3 degrees higher than the control room, she confirmed. "That's not possible." The cargo hold door was different from the others, reinforced steel with an elaborate locking mechanism that looked more modern than 1940s technology. It was sealed shut, unlike the other doors they had encountered. "This would take hours to open safely," Eliza said, examining the lock. "We need to come back with proper equipment." Anton nodded reluctantly, but something on the door caught his attention. Scratched into the metal were words in German, "Gott vergib uns," God forgive us. As they were documenting the door, a sound echoed through the submarine, a metallic groan, as if the structure was shifting under pressure. "Time to leave," Anton decided immediately. "We've pushed our luck enough for one day." On their way back through the submarine, Vincent stopped suddenly in the control room. "Did you move this?" he asked, pointing to the logbook they had examined earlier. It now lay closed on the desk, though Anton was certain they had left it open. "Could be water movement," Eliza suggested, but they all knew the water inside the submarine had been remarkably still. As they climbed back up to the hatch, Anton felt an inexplicable sense of relief at seeing daylight filtering down through the opening. Something about the perfectly preserved submarine felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate, like walking through a moment frozen in time that should have long since passed into history. Back on their research vessel, the team was uncharacteristically quiet as they removed their gear. The usual post-dive excitement was replaced by puzzled contemplation. "We need to report what we found," Anton finally said, "but we also need to understand it before the government takes over the site." That night, as they reviewed Vincent's footage, another mystery emerged. In several frames, reflections in the submarine's polished surfaces showed what appeared to be movement in areas where none of the divers were standing. Shadows shifting where no shadow should be. "Equipment malfunction?" Liam suggested hopefully. "Maybe," Vincent replied, not sounding convinced. When Anton's phone rang after midnight, he wasn't surprised to see it was his colleague from the Maritime Historical Society. The old man's voice was tense when Anton answered. "Tell me you didn't go inside," he said without preamble. "We did," Anton admitted. "How did you know?" The sigh on the other end of the line was heavy with something that sounded like fear. "Because 3 hours ago, every radiation detector in a 50-mile radius of your position started going off. Whatever was on that U-boat, Anton, it's awake now." By dawn, their research vessel was surrounded. 3 Norwegian Coast Guard ships formed a perimeter, and a larger vessel flying both Norwegian and United Nations flags had anchored nearby. Men in hazmat suits were taking readings from the water, and a helicopter circled overhead. "This escalated quickly," Eliza said, joining Anton on the deck with 2 mugs of coffee. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of salt and diesel from the surrounding vessels. Anton took the offered mug, warming his hands around it. He hadn't slept after the midnight call. Instead, he'd spent hours reviewing Vincent's footage, searching for any explanation for what they had found. "Radiation," he said quietly. "That's why the U-boat is so well preserved. Some kind of radiation that killed bacteria and slowed decay." "But that doesn't explain the air pocket or the lack of flooding," Eliza countered, "or why there were no bodies." Before Anton could respond, a rigid inflatable boat approached from the UN vessel. 4 people were aboard, 3 in military uniforms and 1 in civilian clothes. As they came alongside, Anton recognized the civilian, Dr. Werner Kohl, a renowned physicist he'd met at conferences over the years. "Anton, Werner called up, his German accent still strong despite decades of living in England. I heard you found something interesting. Within the hour, Anton's small team sat in their vessel's cramped meeting room across from Werner and two officials, a stern, Norwegian naval commander named Björn Larsen, and a UN representative who introduced herself only as Ms. Chen. Let's be clear about the situation, Commander Larsen began. Your expedition has uncovered what appears to be an undocumented radiological hazard in Norwegian waters. As of now, this is a containment operation. What kind of radiation are we talking about? Nora asked, concern evident in her voice. Have we been exposed? Werner leaned forward. Unlike the officials, his manner was collegial rather than confrontational. That's the most interesting part. It's not radiation we recognize. Not alpha, beta, or gamma. The signature is unusual. Unusual how? Anton asked. It appears to fluctuate. Pulses almost like a heartbeat. Werner's eyes gleamed with scientific curiosity. This matches no known radiation source, natural or man-made. Ms. Chen cleared her throat. Dr. Cole, let's stay focused, Mr. Ryder. We need to know exactly what you saw inside that submarine. Anton described their findings. The preservation, the abandoned stations, the locked cargo door with its ominous message. Liam shared the historical context of U-977's final mission, while Vincent played select clips from their footage. When they showed the video segments with the unexplained movements, Werner became visibly excited, scribbling notes furiously. We need to go back down, Anton concluded. Whatever's happening started 80 years ago and has been contained until now. We disturbed something and we need to understand what. Commander Larsen shook his head. Out of the question. This is now a military operation. With all due respect, Commander, Anton countered, your military divers aren't archaeologists or historians. They won't know what they're looking at. And if they're too heavy-handed, they might make things worse. A tense silence followed. Finally, Ms. Chen spoke. A compromise. Your team can accompany ours under strict supervision, your expertise for our safety protocols. 4 hours later, Anton found himself descending toward U-977 again, but under very different circumstances. He wore a specialized suit with radiation monitoring equipment attached. 2 military divers flanked him, while Eliza and Werner followed close behind. On the surface, Vincent, Liam, and Nora monitored their progress alongside government officials. The submarine looked different somehow. The metal of the hull seemed to shimmer slightly, an effect Anton couldn't recall from previous dives. The military divers secured the area around the hatch while Anton led the way inside. The readings are stronger inside. Werner's voice came through the comm system as they entered the control room, but still fluctuating. Fascinating. They moved efficiently through the submarine, heading directly for the cargo hold. The military team had brought specialized equipment to open the reinforced door. As they worked, Anton noticed something they'd missed on the first visit. A thin cable running from the door along the ceiling, disappearing into a conduit that wasn't on any standard U-boat schematic. That's not original to the submarine, he said, pointing it out to Werner. Good eye, the physicist replied, examining the cable. This looks more advanced than 1940s technology. Almost like fiber optics, but that wasn't developed until decades later. The military technicians finally announced the door was ready to open. Everyone tensed as the heavy metal portal slowly swung outward. Anton's light was the first to pierce the darkness beyond. The cargo hold had been completely transformed from its original purpose. Where torpedoes or supplies should have been stored, the space was filled with what looked like laboratory equipment. At the center stood a device unlike anything Anton had ever seen. A spherical chamber made of a silvery metal, suspended within a framework of copper coils and quartz rods. The sphere was about 2 meters in diameter with a small viewport cut into its side. Mein Gott, Werner whispered, switching to German in his shock. Do you know what this is? Anton shook his head, captivated by the strange device. This is Die Glock, Werner said, his voice filled with awe. The bell. It was supposed to be a myth, a conspiracy theory about Nazi superweapons, a device that could manipulate time and gravity. That's impossible, Eliza said, but her voice lacked conviction as they all stared at the otherworldly apparatus. Werner approached the device carefully, his instruments extended. The radiation is coming from inside the sphere, pulsing like I said. But look at this. He pointed to a digital readout on his equipment. The readings are out of sync with real time. It's as if the radiation exists slightly out of phase with our reality. As Werner examined the device, Anton discovered a metal cabinet bolted to the wall. Inside were folders of documents and what appeared to be research journals. Though written in German, the technical diagrams were clear enough. The device had been designed to create a field that somehow isolated objects from normal time flow. According to these notes, Anton said, leafing carefully through the papers, they were using it to preserve sensitive materials. But something went wrong during a test. The field expanded beyond the device itself, encompassing the whole submarine, Eliza concluded. That's why everything is preserved. It's been, what, frozen in time? Not frozen, Werner corrected, still taking readings. Moving at a different rate. These documents may be 80 years old to us, but to matter within the field's influence, perhaps only days or weeks have passed. One of the military divers suddenly spoke up, his voice tense. Command says we need to evacuate immediately. The radiation signature is growing stronger. As they prepared to leave, Anton noticed a leather-bound journal half hidden beneath a cloth on a small desk. He quickly secured it inside his equipment bag before following the others out. The journey back through the submarine took on a nightmarish quality. The lights seemed dimmer, and shadows appeared to move at the edges of their vision. Anton could have sworn he heard whispers in German, though the comm system carried only the breathing of his companions. When they reached the control room, Eliza suddenly stopped. Did you hear that? Everyone froze, listening. The sound was faint but unmistakable. The tick-tick-tick of the submarine's chronometer, a mechanical clock that should have stopped working decades ago. It's activating, Werner said, his scientific composure cracking. The field is strengthening. We need to leave now. They barely made it to the hatch when the lights on their suits began to flicker. Anton was the last one out, helping Eliza through the opening before pulling himself up. As his head cleared the hatch, he glanced back one final time. What he saw would haunt him forever. A figure in a German naval uniform, standing in the shadows of the control room, watching them leave. Back on the surface, chaos reigned. Every instrument on every vessel was malfunctioning. Compasses spun wildly, and radio communications came through distorted, sometimes playing transmissions from decades past, fragments of war reports and old broadcasts. In the relative safety of their research vessel, Anton finally opened the journal he had taken. The final entry, dated April 15, 1944, but looking as if it had been written yesterday, chilled him to the bone. We have succeeded too well. The bell has created a pocket outside of time, but we cannot control it. The field grows stronger each day. Schroeder entered the sphere to make adjustments and emerged, changed. He was gone for minutes but had aged years. He spoke of seeing the future, of horrors to come if we continue. The crew voted to abandon ship, but I fear it is too late. The bell has tasted time itself, and now it hungers. God help whoever finds this vessel. They will have released something worse than any weapon of war. Time itself, unbound and hungry. Anton closed the journal, his hands shaking. As night fell, the water around U-977 began to glow with an unnatural light that pulsed like a heartbeat, growing stronger with each beat. By morning, the situation had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. The glow surrounding U-977 had intensified, forming a perfect circle on the water's surface 200 meters in diameter. Within this circle, the waves moved in slow motion, as if struggling against invisible molasses. Birds that flew into the affected zone seemed to freeze mid-air, then emerge on the other side seconds later, disoriented and aging rapidly before the observer's eyes. The government response had grown accordingly. A flotilla of research and military vessels now surrounded the site, maintaining a kilometer-wide exclusion zone. Satellite images of the anomaly had leaked online, sparking wild theories and drawing media attention from around the world. On the main UN research vessel, Anton sat in a makeshift conference room with his team, Werner, and various officials. The journal he'd recovered from the submarine lay open on the table between them, its pages being photographed and translated by a team of historians and linguists. The author was Dr. Heinrich Gruber, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses explained, consulting his notes. He was a theoretical physicist who disappeared in 1944. The scientific community assumed he died in the war, but apparently he was assigned to this project. Die Glocke, Werner said, the German words hanging in the air. The Nazi Bell experiment. There were rumors, whispers in scientific circles, but nothing concrete until now. Commander Larson, looking like he hadn't slept in days, pinched the bridge of his nose. So we're dealing with a Nazi time machine? Is that what you're telling me? Not exactly a time machine, Werner clarified. More like a device that could manipulate the flow of time in a localized field. The implications for warfare would have been enormous. Weapons that moved too quickly to counter. Soldiers who could operate in accelerated time relative to their enemies. Anton pointed to the journal. But something went wrong. According to Gruber, the device created a bubble of altered time that engulfed the submarine. They couldn't shut it down, so they abandoned ship, Eliza added. But the submarine remained in this, what would you call it? A time bubble? A chronospatial anomaly, Werner supplied, where time flows at a different rate than our normal reference frame. That explains the preservation, the air pocket, everything we observed. Vincent, who had been reviewing his footage for the 100th time, looked up. But what about the figure I caught on camera? The sailor in the German uniform? An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. According to the journal, the historian said slowly, not all crew members escaped. A man named Schroeder entered the Bell device to attempt repairs. He emerged changed, according to Gruber. Perhaps he remained aboard. For 80 years? Liam asked incredulously. In our time, Werner corrected. But within the field, perhaps only days or weeks have passed for him. The implications were staggering. A Nazi sailor, possibly still alive, trapped in a bubble of altered time with technology decades ahead of its era. Ms. Chen, who had been silent until now, spoke with cold precision. The anomaly is expanding. At current rates, it will reach the Norwegian coastline within 72 hours. The room erupted in urgent questions. Chen raised her hand for silence. Our scientists have determined that the effect intensifies with distance from the source. At the outer edge, we're seeing time dilation of minutes. Near the submarine, possibly years. If this reaches populated areas. She didn't need to finish the thought. People caught in the expanding field would age and die in what would seem like seconds to outside observers. Or worse, be trapped in a nightmarish slow time bubble, experiencing centuries while only days passed in the outside world. We need to shut it down, Anton said, stating the obvious. The device, the bell, it's the source, Werner nodded. The problem is we can't simply destroy it. The energies contained within that sphere, if released suddenly, could cause an explosion that would make Hiroshima look like a firecracker. Nora, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, suddenly spoke. What if we use the submarine itself as a shield? It survived 80 years within the field. If we could somehow sink it deeper, bury it under the seabed. That might work, Werner said, considering the idea. Contain rather than destroy. But someone would need to get back to the device. Set it to reduce output rather than increase it. Then trigger a controlled flooding of the submarine. A suicide mission, Commander Larson said flatly. Anton felt every eye in the room turn toward him. As the lead diver, as the one who had discovered U-977, as the person most familiar with its layout, he was the obvious candidate. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. I'll do it, he said quietly. But I'll need help understanding the device. Werner nodded. I can guide you remotely. Based on the photographs and Gruber's notes, I believe I can talk you through the necessary adjustments. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of preparations. The military assembled specialized diving equipment, designed to provide some protection against the time field effects. Werner and a team of physicists worked out a plan to modify the Bell device. Anton spent hours memorizing the necessary procedures, knowing that communications might fail inside the anomaly. As night fell again, the glow around the submarine had grown eerily beautiful, shifting colors playing across the surface of the slow-motion waves. Anton stood on the deck of their original research vessel, now requisitioned as part of the operation, and watched the illuminated water. Eliza joined him, handing him a cup of hot tea. You don't have to do this, she said softly. The military has volunteers, who don't know the submarine like I do, Anton replied. Besides, I started this. I opened that hatch. They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder in the cool night air. The locals were right, Anton said finally. When they called it the dead zone, they sensed something wrong out here, even if they didn't know what it was. People often know more than we give them credit for, Eliza agreed. At dawn, Anton prepared for what might be his final dive. His specialized suit included a chronometer designed to measure the time differential as he moved through the anomaly. The plan was straightforward but dangerous. Enter the submarine. Reach the cargo hold. Modify the bell device according to Werner's instructions. Then trigger the submarine's ballast systems to send it sinking deeper into the seabed. The readings suggest time is moving approximately 400 times slower at the center of the anomaly. Werner explained during the final briefing. What feels like minutes to you will be hours for us. We've synchronized communications to compensate as much as possible, but expect significant delays. Anton nodded, his face grim with determination. And if I encounter him, Schröder? Werner hesitated. The journal suggests he was altered by direct exposure to the field inside the sphere. He may not be entirely human anymore. Avoid contact if possible. As Anton prepared to enter the water, Vincent approached with his camera. I'm coming with you, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Someone needs to document this, whatever happens. Anton wanted to refuse to protect his friend, but he recognized the determined set of Vincent's jaw. Besides, having another pair of hands might make the difference between success and failure. The descent through the time anomaly was like swimming through layers of reality. The water nearest the surface moved normally, but as they went deeper, everything slowed. Their bubbles rose at a glacial pace. Fish hung suspended, barely moving. Anton checked his modified chronometer. They were experiencing time at roughly 1/8 the normal rate. The U-boat waited below, now surrounded by a visible aura that pulsed with increasing frequency. The metal of the hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid, though it remained solid to the touch. The hatch stood open just as they had left it. Ready? Anton asked, his voice distorted by the time differential. Vincent nodded, his face pale but determined behind his mask. Together they entered the submarine, descending into its depths where time itself had become unmoored, and where something that had once been human might be waiting. After an imprisonment of either 80 years or mere days, depending on which side of time you stood, the interior of U-977 had transformed since their last visit. What had been eerily preserved now seemed alive with impossible energy. The metal walls rippled with faint pulses of bluish light. Gauges on the control panel spun backward and forward, and the air shimmered like heat waves over hot asphalt. Time is unstable here, Anton said, his voice sounding strange in his own ears, sometimes deeper, sometimes higher, as if the sound waves themselves couldn't decide how quickly to travel. Stay close. Vincent nodded, filming everything as they moved deeper into the submarine. The chronometer on Anton's specialized suit indicated they were now experiencing time at roughly 1/20th normal speed. Each minute inside would mean 20 passing outside. They made their way through the officers' quarters, now transformed by the intensifying anomaly. Personal items floated mid-air, suspended in localized pockets of slowed time. A book hung open, its pages slowly turning without being touched, caught in a loop of moments repeating endlessly. Look, Vincent whispered, pointing to a mirror mounted on one wall. Their reflections showed not their diving suits, but what appeared to be German naval uniforms that flickered and vanished when they moved. It was as if the submarine was remembering its original crew, superimposing those memories onto the present. The past and present are bleeding together, Anton said. We need to hurry. As they approached the cargo hold, Anton's earpiece crackled with Werner's voice, distorted and slowed like a record played at the wrong speed. Reading. Massive energy fluctuations. Careful. The reinforced door to the cargo hold stood open, light spilling from within, not the blue glow that permeated the rest of the submarine, but a brilliant, pulsing white light that hurt the eyes even through their protective masks. Anton took a deep breath and stepped through the doorway. The bell device had changed dramatically. The metallic sphere at its center now hovered unsupported, rotating slowly within its framework of copper coils. The viewport on its side emitted the intense white light, and the air around it warped and twisted like a living thing. Werner, we've reached the device, Anton reported, though he wasn't sure if his transmission was getting through. It's evolved somehow. As they cautiously approached, Anton noticed writing appearing and disappearing on the walls. Equations, diagrams, notes in German handwriting that materialized and vanished like ghostly messages. Gruber's notes, Vincent said, filming the phenomenon. The submarine is remembering them. Following Werner's instructions, Anton located the control panel for the device, a mix of 1940s switches and dials alongside technology that looked decades more advanced. He began the careful process of adjusting settings, working to reduce the energy output while preventing a catastrophic shutdown. "This will take time," Anton told Vincent. "Keep watch. We don't know if I'm still here," a voice finished for him, speaking German-accented English. They turned to see a figure standing in the shadows beyond the bell. At first glance, he appeared to be a German naval officer from the 1940s, uniform crisp, cap set at a regulation angle. But as he stepped forward into the light, they saw how wrong that first impression was. The man, if he could still be called that, seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. His form flickered between youth and advanced age, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent. His eyes were the most disturbing feature, entirely white, with pinpricks of light moving within them like distant stars. "Schroeder," Anton said, recognizing the name from Gruber's journal. The figure nodded, his movement leaving trails in the air that lingered for seconds. "What remains of him?" "You should not have awakened us." "Us?" Vincent asked, his camera trained on the figure despite his obvious fear. Schroeder's face rippled, showing momentarily the features of other men, presumably other crew members who had been caught in the field. "We have become something new in here. Not living, not dead. Experiencing all moments at once." Anton continued working on the control panel, trying to maintain focus. "The device is affecting populated areas. People will die if we don't contain it." "People are always dying," Schroeder said, his voice echoing strangely. "We have seen the entirety of your century in fragments. Wars, disasters, the future bleeding into the past." He moved closer, and Anton noticed how the air twisted around him, as if reality itself objected to his existence. "Do you know what Gruber discovered? Not just how to slow time, but how to step outside it entirely. The Führer didn't want a weapon, he wanted escape. A way to ensure the Reich would survive even if the war was lost. By hiding in a pocket of altered time," Anton said, understanding dawning, waiting to emerge when the world had forgotten. Schroeder nodded, a terrible smile spreading across his flickering face. "I was the test subject, but something went wrong. Instead of slowing time, I became unstuck from it. I experienced decades in moments, saw empires rise and fall in seconds. It drove me mad." As he spoke, his form became more unstable, parts of him seeming to exist in different times simultaneously. A young hand, an old face, a middle-aged torso, all flickering in and out of alignment. The crew fled, but I remained, trying to stabilize the device. Over the years, though it was mere weeks for me, I learned to control it. And now you've disturbed the equilibrium. Anton had nearly completed the adjustments, just a few more settings to change. "We're trying to fix it, to contain the field before it harms anyone else." Schroeder laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Fix it? You can't even comprehend it. The device doesn't just alter time, it sees through it. The bell has witnessed the end of your world, and it's drawing that ending closer." He reached toward Anton with a hand that aged decades in seconds. "I can show you." Vincent stepped between them. "Stay back." Something like regret flickered across Schroeder's unstable features. Too late for that. The submarine shuddered violently. Outside, in what the rest of the world experienced as normal time, the anomaly had expanded again, doubling in diameter. The water around U-977 now moved so slowly it appeared solid, and the glow had intensified to a brightness visible for miles. Anton turned back to the control panel with renewed urgency. "Almost there," he muttered. Schroeder watched with those disturbing star-filled eyes. "You don't understand what you're doing. The device can't simply be turned down. If you reduce the field, the temporal backlash will be contained if we sink the submarine deeper," Anton finished, making the final adjustments. "That's the plan." "No." Schroeder lunged forward, his movement leaving blurred after-images in the air. Vincent intercepted him, and for a moment, the two struggled in a surreal dance where parts of them seemed to move at different speeds. "Finish it, Anton," he shouted. Anton completed the final sequence and slammed his hand down on what Gruber's notes had identified as the master control. The sphere at the center of the bell device shuddered, its brilliant light dimming slightly. At the same moment, he triggered the controls they had brought to flood the submarine's ballast tanks. U-977 groaned like a living thing, shuddering as water began rushing in. "It won't be enough," Schroeder said, his voice suddenly calm as he stepped away from Vincent. His form had stabilized somewhat, settling into the appearance of a middle-aged man with prematurely white hair. "The temporal energy needs somewhere to go." Anton checked the readings. The device was powering down as planned, but the energy levels weren't dropping fast enough. The anomaly outside would continue expanding for hours before the effect of their adjustments took hold. Unless... Schroeder looked at the bell with something like longing. "I can contain it. Draw it back into myself." "That would kill you," Anton said. "I died 80 years ago," Schroeder replied with a sad smile. "This has been something else, a purgatory of my own making." Before they could stop him, Schroeder stepped into the framework surrounding the sphere and placed his hands directly on the metal surface. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Energy coursed through him, his body becoming a conduit for the temporal forces. He aged and youthed and aged again in rapid succession, his form blurring as if trying to exist at all points in his lifetime simultaneously. "Go," he screamed, his voice somehow coming from everywhere at once. "The submarine is sinking. Get out while you can." Anton grabbed Vincent's arm. "We have to leave." They ran through the submarine as it groaned and tilted, water now pouring in from multiple sources. Behind them, the cargo hold had become a maelstrom of light and distorted time, with Schroeder at its center, drawing the energy of the bell back into himself. Their ascent through the submarine was a nightmare of tilting corridors and rising water. The chronometer on Anton's suit spun wildly, time flowing inconsistently around them. Sometimes they moved as if in molasses, sometimes with unnatural speed. They reached the hatch just as water began flooding the control room. Outside, the anomaly was visibly contracting, the perfect circle of affected water shrinking back toward the submarine. As they swam upward, away from the sinking U-977, Anton looked back one last time. Through the swirling waters, he caught a final glimpse of the submarine, and in a flash of impossible clarity, saw not just the U-boat as it was now, but as it had been in 1944, and as it would be in decades to come, resting deep in the silt of the ocean floor, its deadly secret finally at rest. On the surface, aboard the research vessel, Anton and Vincent were met with stunned silence followed by eruptions of relieved cheers. The anomaly had collapsed entirely, leaving only normal seawater where the glowing circle had been. Deep-sea sensors confirmed that U-977 had sunk to a depth of over 1,000 meters, embedding itself in a deep trench where it would be nearly impossible to reach. In the weeks that followed, as government agencies worked to classify much of what had happened, Anton found himself unable to forget the look in Schroeder's eyes, a man who had seen too much of time and been unmade by it. The journal of Heinrich Gruber disappeared into government vaults. But before it vanished, Anton had memorized the scientist's final warning. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. The bell showed us that time is not a river flowing in one direction, but an ocean with currents and eddies. We dipped our hands into that ocean, and something noticed our intrusion. When asked by reporters what exactly had been found aboard the submarine, Anton would only say that some mysteries from the war were best left buried in the darkness of the deep. But in his dreams, he still saw those eyes filled with stars, and wondered what Schroeder had really witnessed in his journey outside of time, and whether something from beyond that broken boundary might someday find its way back.